Welcome back. Before we go ahead and install Docker, I thought of creating one additional session to talk about Docker terminology and also revise our all previous concepts. Now let me tell you why this is important. Now imagine you are walking first time into a car factory and their workers and people, they are talking about terms called chassis, engine, blueprint, assembly line. All these sound like complex, right? Because you are hearing all these words for the first time, right? Similar, when you are learning new tool like Docker, so you should have very good understanding of this terminology, so you will be able to understand these concepts in more perfect way. Because of that, I have decided to create this session. As I said again, most of the concept will be familiar to you, but only my point is to make sure you are 100% sure and understand all these concepts. So let's start with the first concept called Docker CLI. So what is Docker CLI? As we understood in the previous session, Docker CLI is the remote control of the Docker, right? So using Docker CLI, as this is command line tool, it allow user, means us, to interact with the Docker. What we do, so using this CLI, we send commands to Docker Daemon, right? And what is Docker Daemon? Docker Daemon is the brain of Docker, right? And that's basically do all the work. So what we do, using this Docker CLI, we send command to Docker Daemon, and Docker Daemon do all the real work. Again, I have given one a small analogy for you to understand, but again, I'm going to attach this whole document in the downloadable section. You can download it, understand it, so I'm not going to read it. Now let's understand this with the example. So here you see we have some example. So first is Docker build, right? So here what you see, Docker is the command line tool, right? Then we are passing a command called build. So what this will do, this will create an image from the Docker file, right? What is Docker file? Docker file is the file where we write a specification of our container, right? So using this Docker file, we create the image. And how? Using this command docker build, right? Now second command we already understood, docker pull. So using docker pull, what we do, we fetch images from the registry. What is a registry? So this is online platform like Docker Hub, right? So from there we pull any public images or maybe our own images. So for that we use this command called docker pull, right? So what we are doing, we are using again CLI, right? Docker CLI, and using this command. So again, using Docker CLI, we are fetching this image. Now when we need to create a container, run a container, not a create, to run a container, then we run command called docker run. So what it do, it's using the image, right? So using docker file, when we run this command, we created the image. Then using this image, we run a container. Now once container is running, we can again run another command called docker ps, and this will list all running containers, right? So basically if you understood here, so Docker CLI directly don't handle anything like images and containers, right? What is do, it basically simply send a request to whom? To Docker Daemon, right? And Docker Daemon process them, work on them, and do everything. So Docker CLI is the command line tool that we use to send the command to whom? To Docker Daemon, right? So what is Docker Daemon? Docker Daemon is similar to the factory assembly line where we bring all the parts of the car, then we assemble them. Similarly, Docker Daemon is the assembly line for the Docker. So using CLI, when we send the command, right? So Docker Daemon do the actual work. So what is Docker Daemon? Docker Daemon is the background service that manages what? Docker containers, images, network, storage, and everything what we see out of Docker. So everything is done by Docker Daemon. So how this is works? So basically this continuously listen to the commands from the command line tool Docker CLI and then execute them, right? So when we are sending the any command, so what is do? It's listen to the command line, then based on that it's act and perform certain task. So let's understand with some example, and we already understood. So when we create the image, right? So what we do when we run the command docker image, right? So it's go ahead and create the image, right? Again, when we run a command called docker run, then what is do? It's create and run our container, right? It's build our images from what? From the docker file. Again, when we need to pull images from the registry, again it's pull the image. Again, once we have our own image that we want to publish it, then we use command called push to push to the registry, right? So one important things here, if you understood, so this is brain of Docker, right? So if XYZ region, Docker daemon stops, means everything will be stopped. Our all running containers will be shut down. So this is main part of your Docker. For time being, if Docker registry is not working, if your CLI is not working, it's completely fine. But if your Docker daemon will stops, means everything stop. That's why I said this is the brain of our Docker. Now we have the next terminology. Need to understand Docker image. We already understood, but let's quickly recap it. So what is Docker image? Docker image is blueprint of the container, right? So if you need to create the container, then you need image. So without image, you cannot do anything in the container, right? Of course, you can run some command, but if you need to create the container, then you need the image. So this is blueprint for the container. So Docker image is read-only template. Yes, so once we create the image, then you cannot change, modify image itself. So you need to go ahead and change the specification of your Docker file. Then again you have to go and build the image. But once you create the image, then you cannot change this. This is immutable. I have already mentioned in the previous session, right? And you cannot change it. So we use this image to create our Docker container. And as we understood, it contains everything that we need to run a container. So what it has? It has the base operating system. We already understood, right? So it could be Ubuntu, could be Alpine, or anything. It also has our application code and dependencies, right? It could be Python, Node.js, and whatever programming language and the runtime you are using. Then again, runtime configuration. So when we are running our application on any software, right? So our application built with some third-party libraries, right? Some third-party tools. So again, all those tools need to be installed, and once it's get installed, then also it need to be configured, right? And along with the environment variable support, so again we do the runtime configuration. Then we can also write commands or steps how to start our application. So if you are running Node.js application, so what do we do? Node server.js, not js, node server.js. For the Python, again this is spelling mistake, right? So this is Python p.y, right? So this is how we run a container, right? So all these things what you see, everything is the part of our Docker image, right? So it's contain everything, and all those things, right, we write in our Docker specification where in Docker file, right? Now next is, okay, now let's understand with the one example. So how do we pull the image, right? So if you need to pull the image, we use docker pull and nginx. So what it will do, it will go and pull the nginx image that's available on the Docker hub, that is public registry. Now next is the container itself. So when we have the image, then we create the container, right? So what is container? Container is running instance of the image. So we understood how do we create a container. We create container from the image, right? So this is live running instance of our image, right? So Docker container is live running instance of our Docker image. And most importantly, though these Dockers run on the same VMs, multiple Dockers, but they are isolated environment where we run our application. So each container, what you see here, they are isolated. Why? Because it has its own networking. It has its own process. I have already explained in the previous session, right? So this is isolated environment where we run our application. Now, how do we run our application? Again, I've given one a small example here using this command line. Now, let's quickly understand this. So, what we are doing here, we are running a command called docker, then run, then here we have the D. What is D? D is the detach mode. So, we want to run this container as a detach mode, means in background. Then we are passing here P. P is basically port mapping. Okay, so here you see port 8080 and port 80. So here first 8080. So this is our host port. This is our host port, and this 80, what you see here, this is our container port. So what we are saying? We are saying so my this container going to run on port number 80. Let me delete this. So it's going to run on port 80. Then I want to access this container on port 8080, where on the local host where container is running. Don't worry, again I will explain this in more details when we run our first Docker container after installing the Docker. But just again, just some time to do it, repeat it again and again, so this will registered in your mind. Okay, so Docker run, then the attach mode, then -p, we are doing the port mapping. 80 is where container is going to run, and 8080 is where we are going to expose this container on the local host where the machine where container is running. Then we have name, and this is name of the container. So this is going to create a container called my nginx. So this is name of the container. Okay, then how this container will be created? This will be created using the image called nginx, right? So for that we are passing this nginx. Well, now let's go and look into the next term, Docker registry. We already understood what is Docker registry. Docker registry is the place where we store our images, right? So Docker registry is central storage location where we store our images and distribute it. So there are different Docker registry as well. Okay, so one of them is the Docker hub, right, that we already talked earlier. Okay, so this is default and widely used public registry, but we can also use private registry like from the Google Container Registry. This is provided by the Google. AWS Elastic Container Registry, this is provided by Amazon. Again, Azure also has a registry that is provided by Azure. Okay, now let's look into some more term like Dockerfile. We already understood what is Dockerfile, right? So Dockerfile is basically our container specification, right? And this is recipes of building the image. How this is looks like? This looks something like this, right? I have already explained in the earlier session. So what we are saying here, we have okay. So we are going to create the image from Node.js base image. Then we are setting up the working directory inside the container. Then here we are copying from local folder to the from this folder application code. Then we are installing all dependency. Then we are saying container will run on port 3000, then please go ahead and run application like node.node.js server, right? So this we already understood. So this is our Docker file, right? And again, I have explained this everything. You can go ahead and read it. I'm going to attach this in the resource section of this session. Okay, now scroll down. We have the Docker Hub. We already understood what is Docker Hub. Okay, so that's pretty much I wanted to cover here. Okay, so please go ahead and watch this video couple of times. Okay, read this, and this is going to build a solid foundation for your next session of this section. Thank you so much. See you in the next session.